One of the most frequent reasons for people to see their doctor is to treat fatigue or brain fog. In this episode, we look into the causes of brain fog and the potential solutions. I'm Sharif Younis with Dr. Kevin Majors, and this is The Golden Hour. Our all-new online masterclass will guide you through the process of incorporating our full theory of growth into your life, including many of the changes we suggest to reduce brain fog. In this 4-week masterclass available on OptimWork.com, Dr. Majors will guide you through all the key ideas of OptimWork, with exercises provided to help you master them. Now let's get started. Hey, this is Sharif Younis here with Dr. Kevin Majors for another episode of The Golden Hour. Kevin, good to be here with you.
Hey, Sharif, great to be here.
Well, Kevin, it would be great to discuss with you the topic of brain fog, which is something that I bet a lot of people can relate to. I certainly have experienced it, but it's kind of this sense of that you're not operating at full capacity, mentally when you're trying to solve problems or doing intellectual work. So I don't know if there's if this is like a thing in the medical community. Is this something that you would be diagnosed with? Is it a real condition, or is it just something that is kind of commonly talked about?
I think that it is something very real and very physical. I've heard it said, although I haven't been able to confirm it, that 40% of all visits to primary care doctors are for brain fog or fatigue. It's a sense that you have that somehow the brain isn't working right and it's just sluggish. And I've always found when I'm talking to people that they do resonate with the idea of brain fog. But a lot more has been written about it now, and it's being discussed a lot more, particularly because of COVID-19. So as a result of that, one of the consequences is brain fog lasting a long time. So I don't think here we'll be discussing particularly the COVID-19 brain fog, but we will be discussing ordinary brain fog that people have and struggle with, and many times for years without even knowing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting that brain fog, fatigue are two of the things that people commonly go to the doctor for. I remember my own primary checkups like mentioning fatigue, and it's also interesting. It's hard to kind of seems to make progress on it. I don't know why that is, if there are just many different possible causes of it, or what the deal is there. But I don't know, Kevin, could you maybe just clarify some of the conditions of brain fog, maybe some of the symptoms, I guess?
I think it's trouble remembering and focusing primarily, but it shows by people going into a room and not knowing why they went there, starting a sentence and not knowing how they were intending to end it, frequently losing things, misplacing things, having trouble remembering names, having trouble remembering details. Any of those things get into problems with short-term memory and the working memory that we have, and it shows that there's something slowing down the mind. We want our minds to be crisp and clear until the day that we die, hopefully at a very old age. So brain fog in some ways is perhaps, and this is the concerning thing, it's a beginning of cognitive decline. So even though it can show up in young people, it's still not a healthy way for the brain to be. There's something here that the brain isn't working well. And the deeper issue is an issue of inflammation. And that's the real concern is there something that's actually inflaming the brain, and making it not work as well as it normally would? So, and if that goes on for years and years and years, then it can lead, the concern is, to worsening cognitive decline as people go on. Now, not everyone who experiences brain fog, because most people probably get it from time to time, will be experiencing cognitive decline, but people who experience cognitive decline often have reported they had a lot of brain fog earlier than that. So the question the medical community is now facing, there's no clear answer in my mind, is Is brain fog the harbinger of something worse, of a general decline?
Mhm.
I don't know. It could be, maybe it's not, but certainly it is a way that affects people's ability to work and to live their life well, to actually attend to the people that they're with and to get into the tasks that they're doing. So I think that it's something that needs to be treated because it is treatable. Brain fog should be treated until it's gone. People should be working to figure out what exactly is going on here until it lifts. But I think what happens is because it has multiple different causes, it can be hard for people to pin down and get it right and to actually isolate what's the cause of the brain fog.
Mhm. Now, just quick follow-up question on something you said earlier, which is that the root is inflammation. Can you clarify a little bit what you mean by inflammation of the brain? Usually, when I think of inflammation, is like when you, I don't know, sprain your ankle and there's
Mhm.
inflammation. Is it the same kind of thing? And so, does that mean that the solution is to ice it, or
Mhm.
what should we do?
Yeah. So inflammation in the brain isn't able to cause much swelling, but what happens is you have a decrease in the effectiveness of the neurons working together. You know, and even the immune cells in the brain have many functions, and if they're busy, in an inflammatory response, they're less able to do their other functions, and then you end up with more byproducts, kind of that are accumulating. So, for instance, the tau protein that's associated, not causally, but somehow associated with Alzheimer's, uh, is just a generic mark of inflammation in the brain. That there is a process of inflammation that went on for a long time, and then you get a buildup of tau. So, I think that when we talk about inflammation, we're talking about something called, maybe more precisely, oxidative stress. And we're talking about something that's happening with the people's neurons and the energy cells in the neurons, the mitochondria, not working well. So our neurons will have tens of thousands, perhaps, of mitochondria in each neuron that supply all the energy that that neuron needs to function at its best. And you want all of your mitochondria in the brain functioning at their best. The problem with, what happens is the mitochondria, especially if they're burning the wrong fuels all the time, glucose namely, if they're always burning glucose, and perhaps missing certain key, vitamins that they need and other cofactors they need to function well, they become inefficient in what they do. And it gets really technical really fast when you're talking about mitochondria because they're endlessly fascinating. But let's just say that they become inefficient at producing energy, ATP, and they end up producing more free radicals in their process because you get proton leakage, and so you have excess electrons needing to bind to things. They end up binding to oxygen, and now you have these free oxygen radicals, which then cause inflammation. They attach themselves to other molecules, and you end up then the mitochondria start swelling, and the cells swell slightly. As the mitochondria swell, their membranes they actually get less efficient at doing everything. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle they get caught in. And so this is why we talk about the importance of, say, antioxidants to help balance out the production of free radicals from inefficient mitochondrial processing. Okay, just to take a step back then, people don't need to really understand all of that, but you do need to understand that you need to keep your mitochondria happy, and they're happiest when they have the right fuels. And if they are getting the wrong fuels, they become less efficient. And that, I think, is directly experienced as brain fog. What you're experiencing in brain fog is the mitochondria in your brain not working well.
Hmm.
And the brain really does, take up the majority. It's like 20% of all the energy being used in the body, of all mitochondrial energy production, is taking place in the brain. And it has way more mitochondria than other things. So it's all about energy in the brain. And when you have highly efficient mitochondria working at their best, you get a clearing of brain fog. So that's what we're interested in, is then how do you clear brain fog?
Hmm. Okay, and I think that's the question next to get into. How do you clear it? And you kind of divide it up into two categories. Maybe one is biological remedies, and then one is psychological.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe we
Behavioral.
can
Yeah.
just behavioral, yeah. So maybe we can
Yeah.
just take those in turn. Uh, in terms of biological, we're always talking about sleep, diet, exercise are kind of the pillars of like well, last week talking about Maslow's hierarchy. Those are kind of the foundational things for being healthy biologically. Are those all applicable in the case of brain fog?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to clear the brain of the toxic buildup of metabolites that happen when you're using it heavily in the daytime, and you need sleep to do that clearing out of those toxic metabolites. Okay, so if you don't have adequate sleep, you're going to get a buildup of these inflammatory things, and so that's a real cause of brain fog is inadequate sleep. Now, to me, that
Mm,
seems like a relatively obvious one because we not only feel brain fog, but we feel more just physically tired as well because the whole body needs sleep. But still, it's really worth mentioning. Um, 8 hours in bed is a great thing to aim for, and producing something like 7 hours of sleep. Which when the experts say 7 to 8 hours of sleep, really the body generally is going to need for most people around 7 hours, and but that often means 8 hours in bed. So people can check out the Circadian Code to read more about that. It's a wonderful book on circadian rhythms and how sleep works and how much we actually need. So, okay, so sleep is one thing. And then diet, well, diet is perhaps the hugest thing because that's what determines the fuel that your mitochondria have to work with. And there's two things. What are you eating and when are you eating? We know that your mitochondria are much happier burning fat than burning glucose because they can make ATP way more efficiently when they're in fat burning. But if you are eating all the time and getting very little ketosis going, ketosis is when you actually are using fat to burn energy. So it ends up wearing down the mitochondria. So one of the best things you can do to keep them happy and healthy is give them a break from eating. And so eating within a restricted time period, at least 12 hours, so that you give your mitochondria 12 hours to be burning through things and not just handling the food that you're ingesting right now, and perhaps then getting a little bit of ketosis going, as you have a really small kind of intermittent fast. But then the more you can limit the eating window, in fact, the happier your mitochondria seem to get because they get better and better at burning fat. So it's part of the reason why it's hard to switch to intermittent fasting because your mitochondria just aren't used to it yet. But once they get used to it, they do prefer it. It's a way more efficient, clean way of burning energy and can reduce brain fog substantially. So just doing the intermittent fasting can be a way actually of helping people clear brain fog because you're just
mm,
giving the mitochondria better ketone fuel for them to be burning. The other thing, though, is what you're eating. And this gets into a very big topic. Just to say, if you're eating junk, your energy levels are going to be junk. Your energy levels are very tied to your eating. And eating high quality foods will lead to higher quality energy. So when people are eating things like processed sugar and generally processed foods, there are so many ingredients in there that could be throwing off your mitochondria, and who knows what it's going to be. The simplest thing is to try eating whole foods. Clean, vegetables especially, but meat, fish, vegetables, uh, fruit. Whole foods will give your mitochondria the kind of food they're used to processing historically, and so that they're better able to handle it. Okay, so getting rid of processed foods, I think, if a person has brain fog, it's a necessary step. That you just leave processed foods and fried fat. Frying actually damages fat, and then those things cause a lot of problems down the line, inside your body. So trying to stay away from things that are obviously bad, processed, fried. The other thing that's really important for a lot of people, just to dive in, are sensitivities to food. So that's something I've experienced is brain fog caused by food sensitivity. that was hard to figure out for a long time. And eventually I tracked it down to histamine sensitivity and removed foods that had histamine. And whoa, the clarity of thought came fully back. Now, I would have periods each day of total clarity of thought, but I felt like, boy, once I removed a food sensitivity issue, which hopefully is temporary, these things can come, some of the like histamine intolerance can come and go. But boy, if a person has brain fog, and uh, well, there's a whole host of symptoms there, but headaches, chronic headaches are a really big one. Uh, Read about histamine intolerance. More commonly though, you have gluten and dairy, because people think of like if you're gluten intolerant, they say what happens with celiac disease. Well, that's a very severe, more specialized immune reaction happening to gluten, and that's a different thing than non-gluten. I'm sorry, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So that is a much more common phenomenon, that people can be sensitive to gluten without having celiac disease. And they'll never know unless they go off gluten for a time. So dairy is the same. People think the only issue is dairy is lactose intolerance. But no, you can be fully tolerant of lactose and yet have significant problems with brain fog as a result of the breakdown of dairy. Dairy becomes casein, and you can get these casomorphins that end up crossing into the brain and are inflammatory. You can also, with gluten, you can get these gluteomorphins that cross into the brain and cause inflammation. And the only symptom for some people is going to be headaches or brain fog. So a sense of tiredness, maybe also a sense of being bloated after eating. After you have a meal, you shouldn't feel bloated. You should feel just like you have high energy just afterwards, like before. But people with sensitivities will feel bad after eating certain foods. So the diet intervention, which is the toughest one, but is 10 days, no gluten, no dairy, no processed foods or sugar. And see, how does it clear up? But for a substantial number of people with brain fog, they really get great clarity, and they feel much better. And then you can try adding back dairy and see how it goes. And then if you still feel great, then you could try adding back gluten and see. I wouldn't add back the processed sugars in food, because those are just inflammatory for everyone.
Now, with this approach, you want to know when you make a change, how quickly will you get feedback to know whether it was a good or bad change? So say you add back in gluten, would you expect that you would feel worse immediately? Or is it something that only accumulates after several meals or several days?
It's very hard to say. Some people will immediately feel it.
Mhm.
And so often, and certainly like with histamine intolerance, if you eat a food high in histamine, you can immediately feel it. And so I think that it's going to, people need to give changes several days to be able to notice them fully. So if you take out, I think it's good to do just the 10-day diet challenge, take out all processed foods and gluten and dairy. And then sometimes people feel better within a day. Sometimes it's within 3 days. Sometimes it's not until 5 days or later, that people, and you have to be pretty strict about this.
Mhm.
So, you have to like read up on foods that contain gluten. Beer also has gluten. So it's like, so you have to be consistent in the diet to really be able to notice the change, because it can take days to notice. And that's why these food intolerances are so hard to pin down. That going without them, you have to go for many days without them in order to notice a difference. And then when you add them back, it may be quick or it may be many days. So you want to add one thing back, like dairy, and then go a week. And then you can add the next thing back, and then go a week. So that's the general idea. Is it can take a lot of time. It's also why it's so mystifying to people. They can just feel brain fog coming and going all the time. It's hard to pin down. Well, it might be because it's something that from days ago. So it's not just what you immediately ate that would cause it. That's why you need to go for longer periods of time. But gluten and dairy are the main two offenders, and gluten by far the most frequent. And this is, again, not celiac things. This isn't that it's not an allergic reaction. It's that gluten particles actually are getting into crossing blood-brain barrier and acting as inflammatory mediators there.
Very interesting. Well, Kevin, we don't have a whole lot of time left, so I thought maybe we could just quickly cover exercise. I don't know if you have any points about that besides the fact that frequent exercise helps prevent brain fog.
Well, one of the great things about the exercise can do is get rid of the inefficient mitochondria. So healthy stressors, what they do is once your body is stressed, say by sprinting when you exercise, and that sprinting can result in something like, I've heard it said, a 20% reduction immediately of the inefficient mitochondria. It's like the bottom 20% get canceled. And then new mitochondria are generated so that to replenish them. So it can be that having a certain rhythm, say 3 times a week or maybe 5 times a week, of adding simple sprints into your regimen, that will do wonders for getting rid of inefficient mitochondria. And then, so it's called mitophagy, but you want to trigger mitochondrial death, the death of the weaker ones. And anything that's very stressful, so cold does that. So doing cold showers, in fact, can if they're cold enough, under 60 degrees Fahrenheit, actually can cause mitochondria to be recycled, the weaker ones, as your body gets used to this new cold exposure. Heat, like from saunas, whether they're regular or infrared saunas, actually is a stressor. The sauna is a stressor, and then leads to mitochondrial recycling. So Wim Hof breathing methods, where people breathe very fast. I'm not recommending this, by the way. I think that we still have research to do on those Wim Hof breathing methods, but it does seem like breathing very fast for something like 30 breaths and then exhaling everything and trying to hold as long as you can without inhaling. So maybe 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes, and then inhale and hold it for 15 seconds and do it again. You do 3 rounds of those. That's called the Wim Hof breathing method. He has other variations too, but that's the more common one. It actually does, by depriving your mitochondria really need oxygen, and by holding the breath for these long periods, you get a recycling of the weaker ones. So, but again, I'm not sure that's a fully studied intervention, but it is interesting and people could experiment with it. So anything, these great stressors end up making your mitochondria, eventually the population, more efficient. Doesn't mean you're going to feel immediately great after doing it, because it's going to take some time, but it means that you'll notice over time with these practices, your stamina does increase.
Very nice. Well, then to have a follow-up question, so you mentioned that stressors can help to clear up brain fog. Something that you've mentioned to me previously is that stress can actually be a cause of brain fog in some way, like if you're very stressed out at work, or if you're in threat mode. So I wonder if you could clarify the distinction that you're making there.
Well, there
and then
is
maybe
a link. Yeah. So there's a link between oxidative stress and psychological stress. And that link is cortisol. So that when people are chronically in threat mode, complaining a lot, dreading a lot, and being more filled with negative thoughts, just repetitive patterns of worrying and ruminating, what happens is they get stuck with higher cortisol levels, because is how your body responds to stress. And so now it should be a brief burst of stress, but when it's chronic, the way threat mode often is, it happens then that you have chronically higher cortisol levels. What cortisol does is it tells you all the mitochondria in your body to only burn glucose, don't burn fat. So the mitochondria then are burning something for which should work for a short burst of energy, when you need it. When in fact, glucose burning is less efficient, it doesn't produce as much ATP. There's more likely inefficiencies in the mitochondria that result from that. And so it kind of makes your mitochondria not burn the best fuel, which actually is fat. There's all these other things that happen. You put on, your body ends up storing more fat then instead of burning it, and so you get more abdominal fat, particularly with high cortisol, and that leads to all these other problems. So when people are exercising, and they end up increasing their metabolism, increasing how their mitochondria burn energy more cleanly. But you also need to take care of your attitude, which is perhaps holding you in a high cortisol state of threat mode. And that is done by reframing and mindfulness and embracing challenges. And so when we reframe, we switch off threat mode and the cortisol levels can lower. And mindfulness only furthers that switching off, stabilizing your prefrontal cortex and, in fact, soothing it. So kind of soothing the brain. And I think when you fully engage a challenge, then it can put you right into flow. And flow is a deeply restorative part, cycle for the brain to be in. It's your brain at its most efficient. I think people will find that, in fact, they can get into flow even when they have brain fog. And flow is how they exit it for a moment. And when they're in flow, there is no brain fog. And so just staying in flow for more of the day seems to keep the brain fog at bay. So perhaps flow has deeper anti-inflammatory effects that we don't fully know. It wouldn't surprise me that it does. That just being in flow for more of the day, which often happens when you're challenging yourself and growing and loving others and loving what you do, so that you stay in flow more and more, that actually helps a great deal, even at the cellular level. But that way, for at least certain periods of time, you're not stressing out, you're not in threat mode, you're not ruminating, you're totally engaged with that moment. So doing a golden hour should be a way to escape brain fog. And perhaps the more golden hours you do, it would even treat it.
That's great. Well, Kevin, I think this was a pretty complete discussion. We were able to touch on some of the biological, some of the behavioral. So I don't know if you want to close with any final thoughts.
Only that if a person has brain fog, they should be optimistic about it. In my experience working with people, as they start incorporating, they all work together. Diet improvements, exercise improvements, doing better golden hours, getting right sleep, it all works together, that people can escape brain fog. And if not, if it's something more persistent, well, then it's probably good to check with your doctor, and to get thyroid hormones checked. It can be low testosterone, low progesterone. There are different hormonal causes, and have your fasting blood sugar checked. Just to make sure there aren't other things going on contributing, medically to the brain fog. So I don't know if perhaps 40% of all primary care visits need to breathe for brain fog, but certainly if you're doing these things that we've outlined here and not seeing significant progress, then it is a good conversation to have with the physician. So as a final note.
Great. Well, Kevin, thanks so much.
Thank you, Sharif.
All right, we'll be back next week. Well, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to check out OptimWork.com for a set of online tools to help you engage challenge in your life. See you next week.